I previously covered how to handle attachments from Gmail in 8.10, mainly because it just seemed way harder than it needed to be. Today I want to improve upon that and offer potentially a simpler solution, and as an added bonus I want to deal with handling dynamic attachments on the Outbound for Gmail attachments. Let's dive into a demo, I'll show you what I mean, and then we'll take a look at how to do it. So let's just take a quick look at what we're working with. What I've done is I've sent myself an email that contains no actual information except for a bunch of attached PNG files. In our scenario, we're going to apply some business logic or filtering or whatever in order to create an outbound email, in our case a draft, with a dynamic number of attachments. And what I mean by that is if I've got 4 images in here, then on the outbound it will attach 4, and if I've got 6, it'll attach 6. So it won't matter how many we're actually processing. So let's mark that email as unread, otherwise my N8N will just ignore it. And then we'll dive over to N8N and we'll execute the workflow, and hopefully it works as expected, and then we'll dive into the technical explanation of how to actually implement this. What's interesting as this runs is the Gmail trigger has picked up 6 attachments actually here from 0 through to 5, so 6 in total. The first 2 attachments is marked as JPEG, and it's just a nuance of dealing with Gmail attachments. It's picked that out of my HTML signature, so those can be disregarded. And incidentally, the filter here, if I jump down to the filter function, you can see that 2 things have been discarded, and those are those 2 JPEG files. And ultimately we've kept our PNG files and we've attached them to a draft email. So if I dive back over to Gmail and I think go to more and go to drafts, you can see I've run this loads and loads of times, partly because I was troubleshooting and partly because when I record stuff, I keep stuffing it up. But you can see that I've created a draft email here, and sure enough, we've managed to attach our 4 PNG files. Let's dive back over to N8N and I'll explain in detail how you can set this up yourself. So by far the easiest way for you to get this little workflow, or part of a workflow as it were, set up is to dive over to the Hybrid AI school community. I'll put the link in the show notes. Sign up, it's cheap as chips, and under this helpful explainers or building blocks as it were, dive into that section in the classroom, find the dynamically attached Gmail attachments section or workflow, and download the JSON file. The video explainer will be here by the time you come to watch this video. Just download it and then edit it to your will. If you don't want to sign up, then just follow along with the rest of this video. I'll go into each node and hopefully you can copy it and follow along. So to that end, back in N8N, let's go into each node. There's not that many. Starting with the Gmail trigger, I did explain how to configure the authentication in the previous video, and there's loads of videos about connecting to your Gmail. So I'm not going to labor that point. I think creating the credential is self-explanatory-ish, so I'll leave that. The other parts of these nodes here is I am waiting for a message to be received. That's the event. And you'll need to hit this rocker switch to turn off simplify so you can have some of these options. I've got a filter here for only to process unread emails. That's over to you, really. The main point is that we need to download these attachments. So if you won't see this option, you'll have to hit add option. Make sure to add the download attachments and turn the rocker switch over, and then we will download the attachments if any actually exist. The next section is just a filter node, so you'll add in a filter node. The filter condition that I have is, you can just screenshot that or type it out. So from my Gmail trigger, .item.binary, and you do have to put the actual trigger name, as you can't just sort of pass the typical $JSON. So you will need to explicitly reference that if exists. So basically, if there's any binary data, i.e. there are any attachments, then carry on. If not, then just stop the workflow there. We then have another Gmail get message node. And we're just going to pass along the Gmail message ID from the trigger node, just to make sure we're working with the same email. It's pretty much as simple as that. So the resource is a message, the operation is get, and the message ID is passed along. Now this is the interesting piece, really. So this is a code node in JavaScript. So I'm going to expand this out so you can see it sort of formatted slightly nicer, and it's going to be easier for you to copy. Just pause the video there or take a screenshot or do whatever you want to do. But what we're mainly doing is we're keeping the binary data, which is key, so it can pass on to the next node. And we're also returning some JSON data, the key here being the index number and then the other metadata that's available about the binary file. You may or may not need this. So in my demo, I'm filtering to PNG files only. And you can add and remove and have and or conditions here to your heart's content, depending on what your use case is. I realize that this is just like I say, it's a building block and you will need to adapt this for your own use case. So I'm going to bin that one off and leave it as it is for now. And then the other really interesting piece here, and this whole workflow is actually prompted by a viewer question about dynamically attaching emails to Gmail. They had a situation where under the attachment section, they had to they were manually creating all the attachments depending on how many they thought there might be, and it wasn't dynamic at all. It was sort of hard coded: 2 attachments, 3 attachments, 1 attachment. So that's probably the interesting part of this node. The rest, I think, self-explanatory. We have the credentials. In our case, I'm creating a resource of draft, and the operation is create. The subject line is obviously over to you. This is not particularly that meaningful. That should even say PNG. The original query was about JPEG, and then this piece is dynamic, and I don't want to go too much into what your dynamic expression will be because it will be different for every person. I've got email type of HTML. That could be plain text. It doesn't really matter. And in my case, the message is just static message, which is also not that important. But I want to expand out for you a couple of things here. So this little tooltip basically explains that you only need one single attachment field. If you want lots of attachments, just comma separate them, and you can have as many as you want in that field. So to that end, I have an expression here, which is specific to the way in which we've collected the data. So if you have a different function that doesn't assign the same metadata, then your expression might be slightly different. But if you are copying this workflow exactly, then this expression will perfectly attach the indexes that we've collected. So just copy and paste that exactly. And as you can see, we've got a comma separated value here of attachment 2, 3, 4, and 5, which are all my PNG files, exactly what I want. Cool, that's all I really wanted to cover off today. Hopefully that's going to help some people dealing with both the inbound and outbound side of Gmail attachments. I find Gmail attachments harder than they need to be, let's say, when you're working with N8N, or maybe it's Gmail side. I don't know who's at fault or if it just is what it is. Anyway, until next time, have a good one. Cheers.